So where we at last time? You guys still remember? So we finished the API service layer, right? And we finished our view model, and we also took a look at the. Actually, let me first switch to Limo. And we also took a look at the view we have, so which is the image gallery view. Okay. Okay, let's actually open up the preview. Okay, so let's first take a look at the scattering code I have here. Okay, so essentially, that's actually trying to run that in the simulator. Okay, so for the scattering code we have here, essentially I just create a some kind of empty view with some header. Well, we have editorial feeds, and another section is gonna just generate some random images. Okay, is that clear? Like how the structure looks like for the scattering code of the image gallery view. Okay. 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 So essentially, just I have a scroll view. Okay, to take two section or two separate view. First one is called editorial feeds, and second one called random image. Okay, and for each of, for example, here I have editorial feeds. Okay, it's another computer variable returns some view, and inside that I have a vstack to wrap all the elements inside it, because I want to have the header above all the image below, okay? And so for all the images here, I'm gonna use a scroll view. You guys have seen that before, okay? But this time, I'm gonna use a horizontal scroll view, okay? And to do a horizontal scroll view, you have to do two things. First, you have to tell the scroll view, I want to do horizontally, okay? Because by default, the scroll view do things vertically, okay? So you have to be explicit about that. And the next thing is, inside the scroll view, you have to put some container which can lay out things horizontally. So for example, you can do edge stack, or in this case, I'm going to use the lazy edge stack, which is another new container. And the lazy edge stack is kind of similar to the, what kind of container we used before? The lazy vgrid, okay? When we're trying to lay out things in a two-column style, okay? It's lazy, okay? So it kind of can save you some memory because it reuse the previous kind of cell, okay? Is that clear? Like how we use scroll view horizontally, okay? Now, so we have finished the API service layer, so we can fetch actually we already fetched all the data from the Unsplash API, which is kind of the image service, right? Now we actually want to display all these images, okay? Now one thing I want to do first is actually defining a new function, okay? This function actually take a image, which is the image gallery, and if you guys forget about this one, so this is the model we defined for our API service, okay, last time, okay? It contains two fields. First one is ID. Of course, we want to, loop through all the image gallery, okay? And the next important thing is about the URL, okay? So this URL struct contains all different URLs for different size of the image, okay? And this time we're gonna just use the regular one, okay? Again, it's another URL, okay? So first we call the API service and get back a list of URLs, okay? And then we're gonna use these URLs to fetch the image again, okay? Now let's try to build this function, okay? This function take an image and return some view. Well, actually in this case, it's gonna return some image, okay? And the first thing I'm gonna do is, take the regular URL, which stands for the regular size of one image, okay? This is an URL, so I construct a URL from that, okay? And now let's introduce a new native Swift UI view, which is called Async Image. Okay, it's it's a little bit different from the image we used before because it does things asynchronously. Okay, so it takes an URL, okay, and do things in the background to fetch all the data and parse the data to an image and display that. Okay, so it won't block any UI thread. Okay, is that clear why we want to use async image instead of image? Okay, actually you can build the so-called async image on your own with the vanilla image view. Okay, just with multiple async call. Okay, behind the thing. Now we're actually gonna use this one. This initializer, we're gonna get rid of. Let me see, get rid of the scale and the transaction. Okay, so we're gonna use this initializer. It takes two things. First one is the URL we want to fetch data from. Okay, so we're gonna use this image URL. Okay, and the next thing is the content. So what kind of image, or what kind of what kind of image we want to display? Okay, and it's something called async image face. Okay, let's take a look at this thing. Again, I'm gonna call that face. Okay, it's a closure. Okay, in a trillion closure format. Okay, so for the face, actually it contains different stage when you actually fetch the data from the from a remote server. Okay, in this case, I can say the face.image. Okay, if the face.image is not a none or not a nil, okay, it means, well, we successfully get an image from the remote server. So this image, you can take a look at the type. It's an image, okay? It's just another regular Swift UI view, okay? So you can use this image, just return this one. Okay, I'm gonna say image. Actually, that's it. So one thing I want to do is first, we want to make it resizable, okay? It's been a long time ago when last time we used the resizable. But essentially, just do a recap. So all the image in Swift UI by default is not resizable. Okay, so you cannot, let's say, .frame to change the frame of one image. In this case, you have to be explicit about that to say .resizable to make the image resizable. Okay. And also, I'm gonna introduce one more new view modifier called aspect ratio. Okay, so it just define how the image, sorry, I'm gonna go with fill. So it basically define how the image should fill the area. Okay, so kind of different pattern how to fill the image. Okay, like you can stretch, you can fit, you can use other methods. You can just trick around this parameter and see all the different behavior. Okay, just another view modifier. You can take a look at the documentation. Now, let's do some error handling. Well, because you give a URL, but sometimes the URL can fail, right? So well, sometimes you get some error or the image or the UI is not working or kind of thing. So the face here actually contains an arrow to indicate the potential errors. So we can check the arrow. Okay, actually, let me show you guys the type here. Okay, so it's, well, the type is something optional arrow. Okay. So if this thing is not equal to nil, means, well, at least we have some error here. Okay. So we're gonna display some placeholder to indicate the image loading process is failed. Okay. So actually, I have made a placeholder here. So essentially, we have a text, okay, to say, well, failed to load. Otherwise, in this else branch, okay, we're gonna define the behavior when something is loading. Okay, so the image is not done, the loading process is not done, but we also don't have some, we also we don't have any error. Okay, so it means it's still loading. Okay, so we can just add another placeholder here. It says like loading. Okay, this is how you actually use the async image. Is that clear so far? Like how we use the async image here? to actually detect different face. Okay, all right. Now let's actually use this one. Okay, this function, well, takes the image gallery instance and returns some view. Okay, kind of build the image view. Now let's go back to the editorial feed. Okay, because last time we actually, okay, let's first go back to the API service. Where is that? Okay, service, the API service. Okay, because last time, sorry, it should be the view model. Because last time we finished up this one. Okay, we have finished to load the editorial images. Okay, so now we want to display all the editorial images in our view. Okay, let's go back to this one. This one is the view which defines our editorial view. Okay, and we want to use the image builder function here inside this scroll view. Okay, so first thing we're gonna do is a for each. Okay, so, well, again, get to the top of this one. We have image gallery view model. Okay, and inside view model, we have a list of editorial images. Okay, now we can loop through this one. So image in, actually, let's minimize this one. Okay, now let's use this image builder. Okay, we're gonna build for this image. Okay, is that clear? Like how we use all this syntax here? Oh, good, huh? Okay, so again, I'm gonna apply a frame view modifier here. Okay, in this case, I'm gonna specify like the height to be 200. Okay, let's take a look at this thing. So again, open up the inspiration view, and you can see all these images pops up here. Okay. Now, okay, there's another thing is, what if I want to apply some corner radius on these images? Okay, because in the reference app, let's take a look at the reference app. So in the reference app, we have this image with a nice, like, rounded corner. Okay, how are we supposed to do that? We can do that with a view modifier named as clip shape here. Okay, and it takes a shape, and we have a shape as rounded rectangle. Okay, and this one takes a corner radius. So in this case, we just go with 10. Just indent this thing is a little bit nicer. Okay, here we go. Let's take a look at this thing. Now we have kind of rounded corner radius in this case. Okay. Now let's actually trying to finish up this random images. Okay, and the process is actually quite similar. Actually, exactly the same. Just fetch from different endpoint. Okay. Now let's go back to our view model to finish up the load random images. Okay. Now we can simply just copy paste this one. Well, because they're exactly the same. Okay. Just change this one. Let's say get random images. Okay. And assign this thing to, what's that called? Random images. Okay. Is that clear how we created this function? Okay. Let's now load random images. Now let's go back to our views. And the next thing we want to do is trying to call that async function here. Okay. So recall from the last lecture what kind of thing we need to do right now to initiate the async task. Anyone? Yep. Yes, .task view modifier. Okay, so we can call that .task view modifier on the vstack here. Okay, so this view modifier will execute the code, async code inside this block when the onAppear happens. Okay, still remember the onAppear view modifier. Okay. Now let's say await. What's the name? The image gallery view model dot load, not load. What's the name? Should be load image, random image. Here we go. Okay, load random images. Here we go. Now we have actually load all these images in our device. Okay. Now actually we want to use finish this one, run the images here. Okay. Now again we're gonna do a for each, of course. We're gonna call image view model dot random images, and then we take a image here. Use image builder again. Okay, for this image. And this time I'm gonna use the kind of different frame view modifier. I can say max height should be 200. Okay, again I'm gonna apply a clip shape. Okay, and the shape again gonna be rounded rectangle and take a corner radius like 10. Okay, and let's take a look at this thing. Okay, so here we go. Now you got two different sections. First one is can scroll horizontally, and next one can scroll vertically. Is it clear? So this one we can scroll horizontally, and this one we can scroll vertically. Okay, is that clear? Okay. Now, actually, before we move on, let's take a look at another thing, like how we can utilize the feature of functional programming. Let's move back to this gallery view model. Okay. Now, inside this gallery view model, we have seen this load random images and this load editorial images. They have almost exactly the same body, right? Kind of lots of repeated code. So we can try to extract the common elements out. So for example, I want to define a function, okay, named as load images. Okay, and again, it's an async function. Okay. So this function, I want to make it take two arguments. So first argument, the external name should be the width, okay, which gonna be a function we want to call. Okay. And the type should be like this. Actually, I'm just gonna type all things out right now, and you guys can take a look at the signature. Completion should be right. Images and returns a void. Okay, take a look at this this signature. So essentially, we're gonna call this load images with different function. Okay, this function, this get images function, gonna actually call the API service we want to use. Okay, and onCompletion again is a function. Okay, inside this onCompletion function, we're gonna do some so kind of in this case, we're gonna assign all these results to corresponding variable, to the corresponding fields. All right. Now let's actually finish up this one. So again, I'm gonna do some garlic error checking to call the getImages function. Okay, and this getImages function is async function, so we need to use the await keyword before that. Is that clear? Okay, so getImages is kind of equivalent to this one. Okay, because we can use that as a kind of parameter. Okay, to pass into that getImages function. Okay, so it's a async function. Okay, so if something happens, some error happens, I'm just going to return. I do nothing. Okay. Otherwise, I'm going to check if the task is finished, is canceled. If it's not canceled, okay, so we're going to call this onCompletion function with the result passed in. Well, there's lots of things going on with the functional programming. So we pass lots of functions around and call the function inside another function. Okay, so is that clear so far? Okay, now actually trying to use this function. So far actually this function is have some problem. But anyway, we're gonna call this function. Okay, so again now we can remove all these things. Okay, so I can just call await load images, okay, with a function. This time we're gonna use the image API gallery API service and get editorial images. Okay, we're gonna use this function. And onCompletion function says when it's get completed. Actually, I'm trying to make it into a trailing closure form. Okay. So this is images I passed it into this onCompletion function. Okay. And when it's completed, okay, this images is the result we get from the web API service. Okay. And we're gonna assign this one to editorial images. Okay. Sorry, it should be the images. Okay. Is that clear? Okay, now we can, well, of course, copy paste this one here. And this time, we're going to see get random images. And it's going to be random images. Okay? Is that clear? Okay, so have you guys spot any problem here? What's the problem? Potential problem. Yep. Yeah, we lost the await main actor.run. So the problem here is when we actually execute this function, it may not be on the main thread. Okay, actually, it definitely not gonna be on the main thread. Okay, so actually, let's take a look at what's the behavior when we do something that's when we update the UI, but this update process is happening in some background process. Okay, let's take a look at this one. Well, you can see somehow it still works. Okay, but the Xcode gives you some warning. Okay, it says publishing changes from a background thread is not allowed. Okay, so as I mentioned before, last lecture, this one is undefined behavior. So sometimes it might work, sometimes it may not. Okay, so make sure you do this. You do all the function which gonna involves the updating the UI things on the main thread. Okay, so one thing you can do is again put this onCompletion function, which essentially is this function we call. Okay, gonna say await main actor.run. Okay, and I'm gonna put this one into this thing. So actually, we can get rid of this thing to make it a trailing closure form. Okay, now let's take a look at this thing. Now here we go, without any warnings. Okay, so now let me actually show you one more thing with this main actor.run. Okay, actually you can get rid of this thing. Okay, just say onCompletion, but instead I'm gonna mark this type here as @main actor. Okay. It's kind of, well, technique you can use. Okay. Now, this time, when you apply @main actor before the type annotation of a function, okay, it kind of generate another function behind the scene. Okay, and this new function is again a sync function. So this time you're gonna await this thing. Okay, now let's take a look at this one. Again, well, it should not have any arrows or warnings. And in this case, again, it runs on the main actor. Okay? Which, well, in this case, you can think that as some sort of main thread. Okay? There are kind of different things, but, well, it's still running in the main thread. Is that clear so far? Okay. Okay, I think that's all for the web API. And now let's move on to the actual topic of today. So we're gonna give a brief discussion on the persistence, because, well, actually, today we're supposed to talk about the concurrency, but since you guys have started your final project and lots of you are gonna use, well, the persistence, well, because you want to save some data on the device. So we're gonna give a brief talk about the persistence, okay, with two different approaches. So first one is called UserDefaults, okay? And we're also gonna give you some options regarding the database. However, unfortunately, we don't have enough time to cover the database in this course, this quarter, okay? So we're just gonna give you some option, and you're gonna learn all these database things on your own, okay? But I'm gonna show you guys how to use UserDefault to do some simple things. So first, let's give you some concepts about persistence. So persistence refers to the characteristics of the state of a system that outlives the process that creates it. So just some boring definition. in the Wikipedia. So in other words, essentially, you want to save data somewhere so that our app can later retrieve that data back. Okay, even if our app gets paused, killed, or just terminated. Okay. Now let's take a look at something called user defaults. Okay, the user defaults is a class defined in the standard library, in the core foundation library. Okay, and it provides a programmatic interface for interacting with the default system. Okay, the default system is kind of just fancy name. Okay, it's some sort of database. It's not really database, some sort of database. Okay, and the default system allows an app to customize its behavior to match users' preferences. Essentially, just you can save some data in the the default system and retrieve the data later. Okay, and you can take a look at when you have time, you can take a look at the documentation here to see all the details about user defaults. Now, there are some comments. So first thing is the user default system, the default system essentially is just a key value pair storage. Okay, it's kind of just like the dictionary in your memory when you just write some code with a dictionary. Okay, it takes a key and it pairs a key with a value. Okay, and another comment is behind the scene, the user default class actually writes the data into a file, which is actually a plist file. But anyway, you can think of that as some sort of just creating a file on your own, okay, and write some data into the file, okay, and later retrieve the data from the file, okay. So it writes the data into the file system. And you can also think of the user defaults as some simplest implementation of some sort of database. It's not really a database, okay. And you should only use this user default to store some simple data, such as users' preference settings, okay. But when it comes to some large data, you may want to go with database, okay, because it's not well optimized. Now let's take a look at the usage of user default. So again, just like when you use the URL session, okay, you can use this user default.standard to retrieve the singleton of a default system, okay. And how to actually set the data, like store the data into the default system, okay. You can say, for the user default class, it defines a function called set. Okay, you can set some value, some integer, okay, with a key. Okay, the key is essentially just as the name suggests, it's a key. Okay, it's kind of like the dictionary, the key for the dictionary. Okay, so this key maps to this value. Okay. And you can also set the string, store a string, and you can store the date, okay? And each value should be associated with a key. Okay, that's quite important. Now, how to retrieve the data, okay? So again, Apple provides a lot of interface to help you conveniently retrieve the data from the default system. So for example, again, I can call the integer function on the default instance, okay? And I'm gonna say, this time I'm gonna fetch the data with the key as age, okay? Now in this case, it's just gonna return a 25, okay? Because we set that data before, okay? Is that clear? And also, of course, we can get a string, okay? Now, what if we want to get the date back? Well, you may want to do something like that, okay? With default instance.date. Well, unfortunately, Apple doesn't provide such interface for you. Okay, it does not have that interface, so it's not working. But Apples have another interface called .object. Okay, so in this case, you can retrieve anything. Okay, and return type should be something called any, and this one is kind of the any type is ancient in the Apple's platform, okay? And essentially, it's just some type erased value, Okay, it can be any type. So you have to do a type casting in this case. You guys have seen this as keyword before when we do the type casting from the HTTP, well, what's that called? HTTP response to the HTTP URL response, right? Essentially just kind of keyword to casting type. Okay, and in this case, I'm gonna cast that to a date type. Okay, so just a question, quick question. So what's the type of this one, of this value, this variable? Sorry. Yep.
Date optional?
Yeah, it's a date optional. Okay, just remember when we use this as with question mark, it returns the optional. Okay, so if the type conversion is successfully done, it returns a date optional date. If it's not, just return new. Okay. Now, of course, we can also save complex type. For example, we can save array. Okay, it's totally valid, and we can save some dictionary. Okay, it's valid. Okay, and what types of date the user default system can store? So it's from the Apple's official documentation. It says an instance of, well, or the collection or a combination of instance of NS data, NS string, NS number, NS date, NS array, and NS dictionary. So the prefix of NS is kind of, well, historical leftover thing. Okay, it's from the old world of the Objective-C. So in the Swift, world, you can think that as data, string, number, date, array, or dictionary. Okay, just some naming. Okay, due to some historical reason here. Now let's take a look at how we actually persist settings data. Okay, now let's go back to our project. So this time we actually migrated our code to the solution of homework 3. Okay, so you can actually first take a look at this thing. So you have the floating button. Okay, you have the settings view. Okay, you can adjust the settings view. Okay, and you can also see the floating button actually change things. Okay, but one thing is, for example, in this case, user gonna say, I want to disable all the steps preview. Okay, you can say it's effective. But what if user actually close your app? Okay, just close your app and open that again. Okay, you can see all this thing comes back because the data is not persistent right now. Okay, now let's try to make this thing persistent. Okay, so the first thing we're gonna do is to think about how we store, how we should store the settings data. Okay. From the last time when we talked about the web API, we get to one thing called JSON data, right? And to store settings data, we can actually use something called Json Encoder. Last time we used the Json Decoder to decode the JSON string to a class. Okay, this time we can use something called Json Encoder. Okay, so we're gonna encode our class to a JSON data file. Okay, is that clear? Because we don't have the slides for that one, but is that clear? Okay, so give me a second. Let me take a look at the settings. Okay, the settings, view model settings. Here we go. So first thing I want to do is create a computer variable. It's named JSON. Okay, and the type should be the optional data. Okay, just for our later, like later we're gonna use this data, which gonna be use this variable, which gonna be more convenient for us to do things. So this JSON thing gonna utilize the JSON encoder. Okay, let me show you the syntax. Again, I'm gonna use the try with question mark. So I'm gonna say JSON encoder. Okay, and I'm gonna encode itself. Okay, again, we're gonna have some warning. It says it requires the settings conform to another protocol called encodable. Last time we introduced one protocol named as decodable because we want to decode that class. Okay, this time I want to do encoder, so I have to be encodable. Sorry, encodable. Okay, so you can see the warning goes away. Now, when we access the JSON, this computed variable, so we're gonna try to decode ourselves and return something that's called optional data, because we use this try with question mark. When the decode process actually, like maybe have some something goes wrong, okay, it returns a nil, okay. Otherwise, it just returns the data, sorry, optional data, okay. Is that clear? How we define this thing? Okay. Now, we may want to define another thing. So what if we want to just pass a data in, okay, and trying to initialize, which is gonna create an initializer for this settings class. So sorry, settings struct, okay. Just take a data and parse the data, okay, and well, use the parsed value, okay. So we can define a initializer, but this is gonna be a new syntax. It takes a JSON, which is gonna be a data optional, okay. So this one is a new syntax here. Well, you guys have seen all the initializer before. We just say init with a parenthesis after that, okay. This time I'm gonna say init with a question mark and followed by a parenthesis. So this is failable initializer. In this case, if something goes wrong in this initializer, I can just return new, okay? So by using this initializer, the return type is gonna be an optional of settings, okay, instead of settings when we call the initializer, okay. Now, we have the JSON data. In this case, we're gonna use the JSON decoder to decode the data, okay. Let's do some arrow handling, actually unwrapping here. So first thing is JSON is the optional data, so I want to take the value out. Okay, so if the JSON equals JSON, okay, and also if let settings equals try with question mark, I say JSON decoder and decode the JSON data here. From the data type should be self. Okay, let's take a look at this thing. Should be settings.self. Okay. Is that clear, the syntax? Last time we briefly talked about the chaining of the let statement here. Is that clear why it works or why not? It works. Is that clear how we use the, so if all these things happens correctly, okay, it's just gonna, so if you want to go into this branch, okay, we have to make sure, first thing is the JSON contains some valid data. And also this try block, this decode function actually works properly, okay, without any warnings, okay, without any throw exceptions. Okay, is that clear? Now the thing, actually we should go with self. Let's take a look at the warning. Yeah, it says, well, the settings should be conformed to the let's see, the decodable protocol, which we already see that before. So we have to convert this to decodable. Okay. Now in this case, I just say self equals this setting. Here we go. Okay, you can take a look at the type of these settings. Okay, it's just, well, the type is settings. Okay, I can assign these settings to self. Okay, is that clear? Okay, now, otherwise, I'm just gonna return new. It means something goes wrong during the initialization. Okay. Now, another thing I have to mention is, when you have something, well, at the same time should be encodable and decodable, you can just say codable. Okay, codable just some type alias for encodable and decodable at the same time. Okay, so this codable stands for two protocol. Is that clear? All right. Now let's see. So we already have our settings. Now we're gonna modify our settings view model. Okay, so you can already see I have three functions here. So first one is gonna loading settings. Second one gonna save settings, and the third one is gonna remove the settings. Now I also declare a key which is gonna use to associate it with the data we store in the default system. Okay, so for the load, so first we're gonna finish this load settings. Okay, so for the load settings, first I'm gonna say settings JSON, let's say user defaults. Okay, we're gonna access the singleton. Okay, so dot standard. Okay, I'm gonna store an object for key. We're gonna retrieve the data from this key, which key is gonna be the settings file key. Okay. Now we also gonna do a type conversion to convert it to a data. Okay. Actually, in this case, you have a convenient call, just say data. Okay. But in this case, just gonna demonstrate you guys like how to use the object and how to do the type conversion with the ask keyword. Okay. So by doing that, we have a type of optional data. Okay. Now we can set our settings with the new initializer we defined before. Okay. So this initializer can take a optional data. Okay, which gonna be our settings JSON. Okay, so also good. Now it can also, this initializer actually can be new. Okay, so we again gonna do some error checking, error handling here with new coalescing operator. So if this one actually returns new, we're gonna fall back to a default one, which is gonna be just a default initializer. Okay, initialize all these things by default. Okay. Now let's move on to the next function, which is gonna let us to actually save settings. Okay, and it takes the settings, which is gonna be optional settings. So if the settings, if user passed a valid settings in, okay, I'm gonna actually store that settings with again user default standard. I'm gonna use the set. Okay, and I'll set the new settings here. Okay, for the key, gonna also be the settings file key, just some string I defined before. Okay, otherwise, I'm just gonna let's copy paste this actually. Otherwise, I'm just gonna save our settings, which is in our view model. Okay. So if user passed some settings in, I'm gonna save that settings. Otherwise, just gonna save our default settings in this view model. Okay, so we finish our save settings. Of course, sometimes you may want to remove settings from the default system or remove the data from default system. We can take a look at the code again. You have this function called as remove object. Okay, you can give it a key. Okay, you're gonna remove the data, remove the object associated with that key. Okay, is that clear so far? Okay, now, so you already have the load settings thing and save settings. Okay, so first you want to load the settings in the initializer. So when you initialize this view model, you want to load the settings, right? So I can call this load settings here. And of course, when you actually change something, you want to save settings. Okay, so for example, take a look at this 4 computer variables you guys created before. Okay, so you have a set, you have setter here. So when you set a new value to these settings, okay, I want to call the save settings here. Okay, in this case, I give it nothing. Okay, so you're gonna save the settings in this local field. Sorry, in this local the local settings in this view model. Okay, so I just copy paste several times. Do things like some kind of stupid. So it looks like that. So when you set some value, you're gonna call the save settings. Okay. Actually, you can reduce the code redundancy by using the combine framework. But well, again, we kind of run out of time, so we can skip the combine framework. But this is also working version, just a little bit stupid because there's lots of redundancy here. Okay, but it's working. Let's take a look at this thing. Now, for example, I want to change the title. Like for example, I say, oops. Let's take a look at this thing. Give me a second. Settings. Wait, I didn't see anything wrong here. Spot any error here? One of type is not really encodable or cannot be saved to the user default system. Okay, let's try another thing. So, for example, I want to disable this thing. Wait. Let's go back to this settings view model. Let's see.
We called that JSON on the settings.
JSON. Yes, exactly. Wait. So settings.json. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, thank you. Because we want to actually save the data, okay, instead of this class. Okay. That's why we defined this JSON computer variable before. Okay, now let's take a look at this thing. So for example, I can modify this thing. Let's say welcome, equal, and of course you can see all these things kind of synced up. Okay, but what if I want to kind of kill our process and then reopen that? You can see all these things get persisted. All right, it's a progress. Okay. Now, of course, actually, there's something else you can use. It's called, it's provided by the Swift UI. It's called app storage. Okay. Again, it's a wrapper around the user default system. You can give a name here. You can see, for example, this time I'm gonna save the maybe show step preview, this boolean. And first, I'm gonna get rid of this boolean. I'm gonna save this boolean with this thing, okay, with this app storage, okay. Essentially just a wrapper around the user default system, and you can achieve something similar to that, okay. So it can save you lots of code, but I'm just gonna stop right here, so you guys can look up the documentation of this tool. It's called app storage, and correspondingly, there's another one called scene storage. But that one is going to be some kind of useful when it comes to the development of iPad software. Okay. Now let's go back to our slides and give a little bit talk about the databases. So there are 3 options you can try. Okay. First one is called core data. And this is kind of Apple's database management layer, which is built on top of SQLite. Okay, and it provides more feature set compared to the vanilla SQLite, and you can take a look at the official documentation if you are interested. And the core data is not exactly a database. The database still is SQLite, but core data provides a richer interface and more features. And of course, you can just go with SQLite if you just kind of do things simply, just do simple things. Okay, and you can also try the RUM, which is the third-party library hosted on the GitHub, and it's quite awesome library to do the database thing. And that's all for today. All right, see you guys in 2 days.